Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you for putting this together. I'm really grateful. And thank you to Gina as well. And thank you to Jackson McNally. I'm so glad to be here virtually. I'll just say a few words about the Death Spiral. First, thank you for those who did pre-order the book. It is forthcoming and it should be released by the end of the month, if not the beginning of July. So thank you all for your support. So the Death Spiral, it's a cheery title, right? It's actually a title that addresses animal behavior. So there are eagles that engage in this courtship display, which is called the Death Spiral. What they do is they engage talons, and they essentially soar through the air and fall. And they determine, they risk death until determining when or if to let go. If they survive the stunt, they validate the fitness of their mate. If not, the test can end in fatal collision. So this is actually what I think of as a metaphor for the kind of precarity that we're all facing under this current administration, and specifically for me, it's a metaphor for living in the age of Trump, being in a relationship with my wife, who's an immigrant, in a time when we are facing such xenophobic policies, as well as anti-LGBTQ policies as well. So this is the Death Spiral, and I'll read a few poems from the collection. So the opening poem is called Family History. And this is a poem that is in memory of my great-grandmother, who was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. It combines family history, family lore, and a touch of imagination. No God is more inscrutable than ours. Think of how our century began. Red fistfuls of pomegranate blossoms knuckling the windows in the early dawn, a warning mist and a call to rise. And at the doors, the early monsters of modernity, trained to be meticulous, expedient, propitiated neither by suffering or the skirl of exile. Think of your grandmother with her rabbit-beat heart, who knew something about hope's atrophied muscles and the secrets of rubies. She scooped pomegranate seeds into her pockets to sustain her. During the march, God roosted in her inner ear and whispered back such strange flashes of memory. The first clean A she played on her spiked fiddle, the last goat she skinned, the wet cord that tied her to her son, the gleam of her sister's scissors that snipped it off, the gleam of the bayonet that killed him. She watched her daughter's ribs peek through the skin, and in time realized that God is anonymous and intimate as a nurse who can deliver pain or take it away in the same breath. What do we say? Our family history? A death sentence, and yet you breathe. You tell me the rest. Next poem is called New Talk, Alaska. And this is a poem about an indigenous group in Alaska called the Yupik, which are generally believed to be the Earth's first climate refugees. There is not much time left, the elders tell us. The river slurps at the edges of our village, and we bury our hungers in work. We raise homes on stilts to ballast ourselves atop the ancient permafrost, but it melts faster than we can build. Sinking, we sing our children to sleep in careening bedrooms, string up and dry strips of pike while the land pitches below our feet, mush our dog teams across a crackling Jacob's ladder of ice. The borders of our world are shrinking. Our kids go jigging for burbot and herring from their front doors. We've seen them towing the drop-off point like seal pups, testing their power, and playing caribou eye in corners where tundra is thin as teeth, ground down to gums, and sour duck sprouts from slush. There's not much time left, and outsiders tell us to start over in Anchorage, city of disappearances, before we are swallowed up by sea. We prepare to move to higher grounds. We apply for funds, pray the government will help. Exile is expensive, and the elders are slipping away. They say their dreams are invaded by ice music, sounds of cracking and whomping so loud they wake with chipped teeth and the taste of sea brine in their mouths. And this poem is called Mammoth Resurrected. I'm not sure if everyone's heard of the de-extinction movement or the resurrection movement, but there are those who are pushing to have genetic engineering of extinct animals so that they would repopulate certain ecosystems. And this poem inquires into that process, not at the ecological level as much as at the individual level. So, Mammoth Resurrected. Before my birth, father was more than fossil. Pickled in tundra, he still had his undercoat of grizzle, teeth, and a knee broken and folded in tighter than a jackknife. When they found him as perfect as the day the sinkhole swallowed him, they dreamed me up. Am I extinct? No, called back, claimed the minds that made me, coaxing DNA from father's bones and toying with mother's genome to invent a new sequence for me. Poached from another eon and implanted in her womb, swaying in time with her elephant strides, I grew from mother's coups and breakneck science. My tusk nub scuffed her insides, outscaling her womb too soon and stretching her belly cruelly. And when I arrived late, I knew that mother, who scraped her trunk against my hump and raked her tongue through my wool, was mapping my flesh like ancestral lands. She tested the length of me, making touch memory. Entrusted with my soft spots and whimpers, baby dents and outdated ridges, she, with elephant tact, had no choice but to love me, more grandaunt than offspring, captor, and taboo. I kept below the soft flaps of her breasts, and in the first hungers of infancy, I drank in the millennial air, choked on the seepage of benzene, mercury, and the musk of men, before my mouth found her teat. Bear with me, okay. The next poem is called The Fourth Anniversary. Bad luck to seed the wedding gown hydrangea before the green card arrives, we thought. Though we were wedded 4 years ago, the first time the law let us. Last night, lightheaded with wine, our guests spoke of freedom, how we have it, how others do not, how lucky to be in this country. He passed the bird, she passed the salt, both needing a little bloodshed for paradise. And in my dreams that night, ice burst onto the scene, cattle wagons in tow, to plaster eviction notices everywhere, on our doors, our nick tables, the sheets on our bed. Snouting the air, they found us in bed, voided her green card, drummed Yankee Doodle do or die into our heads. When we didn't sing along, they deemed us all security risks. When I woke to the twilight's last gleaming, I planted my heart under the wedding gown, the tread of my blackest boots tamping down the earth. And this is the title poem, The Death Spiral. Since I explained the phenomenon, I'll just skip the epigraph for now. Suppose that to marry is to defy death, talon to talon, to promise to learn together the art of free falling as mutual deference. Suppose that the law decrees your desire unruly, your body's sylphs or outlaws, but call it sacrifice or symbiosis, you will be one. Suppose that, despite cartwheeling down an updraft of air to the upsurging details below, skyscraper, factory, tree, car, you study only the pale cream moons of her eyes, stricken below their hood, cincture of her wingspan, wind riffled, and the muscly clutch of her tendon-sounding blood. Suppose that just before pavement hits your skulls, there is the ripening of a moment, toeholds and grace, when you both untangle, roll out of your death dance, and fall upwards in thrall of sky. Backdrop of brambles, scrim of treetops. Suppose catastrophe's averted for the moment, but always you'll be on the cusp of it. She, the thermals, and the warming skies are all you can be sure of. You'll preen on the moon if you must. I'll end on a lighter note. So this is the final poem that I'll read tonight, and it's called Wasp Nest. I hear them in my dreams. Their wings beat at a frequency of sea, and out of spittle, wood, and song, they make a cathedral of paper mache. It grows each hour, a gothic fruit below the sweet birch, while they writhe in a fever of toil, laying comb upon comb, feeding their larvae, fine-tuning their hive, sounding their paean to female industry through the streets. When I approach, no, intrude, it is not pain that I crave, but something close to it, her, the queen of meticulous care and fierce motherhood, whose madness is formalized and made into a fortress. I would be a pincushion to her stinger, but instead she clutches me as an eclipse. 6 little claws, 6 little legs. Pillars of wasps rise and fall away like gates when she comes. And when she coaxes me through, I will become her initiate, just as someday a hive of sleepers will pupate and rise from their combs, such formal cells, to form a new brood. There's venom here. I cannot forget it, but nothing reckless. There's pattern and her vision and life, a future in every nurtured crevice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
We also have here tonight Virginia Konchan, author of 2 poetry collections, Any God Will Do and The End of Spectacle, a collection of short stories, Anatomical Gift, and 3 chapbooks, as well as co-editor with Sarah of Marbles on the Floor. Virginia Konchan's creative and critical work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New Republic, The Believer, Boston Review, and elsewhere. Her newest collection is called Any God Will Do. It's published by Carnegie Mellon University Press, and there is a link to buy it from us in the chat right now. With that, I will pass things off to Virginia.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's such a pleasure to read here with Sarah, and I'm overjoyed at the her soon-to-be published book, which I had the honor of blurbing. Such a huge fan of Sarah's poetry, and I'm a little bit teary right now, hearing her read and just seeing her in person, as we email so copiously, and yet I never get to see her beautiful face and hear her beautiful voice. I guess the only thing I'll say in preface of this book I'll read from Any God Will Do is, I think Sarah and my books were composed in a similar time period of, as she prefaced her book with, Trumptopia, ecological rollbacks of ecological protection and planetary fraught state of our planetary world, and political, social states of being and sociality. So I just, the only thing I'll say is that I feel like Sarah and I kind of, it's the frosty and 2 paths diverging in a wood, in the sense that my poems, I think, come, Sarah's work, what I just, and hearing it especially, was the redemptive power of nature, and how she mentioned, the venom and the idea of, the stakes are just as high, but there isn't. Oops, sorry, I think I just lost my main screen. Are you guys still there?
We're here.
Okay, I just couldn't see. Okay, okay, there we go. Okay. I'm just, my poems have a touch of venom in this book, but they're mostly trying to situate within the lyric a place for rage and venom, and also critique of, culture, and also other personal disappointments and disasters. But anyway, I'm touched by, deeply touched by the idea of involving nature in our mainframe of hope, as well as lyric organization and rhythm and rhyme. So this one is, it's not a persona poem, but there are a lot of allusions to the way that nature can help restore vanity and form, not just the mind. It's called Against Nostalgia. I am a master of none, save for the white mutations of dream. Items leak from my grasp. I have a mouth but cannot scream. Dear compass, dear variorium, I want the lion's share of whatever spoils you deign to drop. Process is alluvial, sifting through sediment to find a saltwater pearl. In my off hours, I drowse behind mosquito netting, lured on by the metallic moon, aphrodisiac of oysters and champagne. This is the fourth state of matter, storm cloud of senescence, threatening to break and flood the village again. History is redux, fungus stippling the rock. Where am I now, you think, now that you are no longer thought? You come to me in visions, peeling back the bark of a tree. Loss and compensation, compensation and loss. I am healed of indecision. Do not cast your aspersions on me. All right. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having kind of eureka moment where I'm realizing that most of my poems are kind of angry, not at my ex-husband, which I always thought they were, but more, I hope he's not on this call, glancing at the names, doesn't appear to be there. I'm just kidding. But more like the idea of any kind of male or patriarchal or even institutional authority. So I think a lot of my poems push up against that, and I often use God as a placemaker or signifier, but really it's just a way to kind of pit these non-opposing forces of a perceived authority and an actual reality, which for me is always the natural world. This one is called Homiletic, Catholic upbringing. For those of you that are familiar with the term, it's just a liturgical sermon. Nothing is analogous to God. In order to strike, a cobra also needs to recoil. All good things and strokes of bad luck happen in threes. So let it be this way with us, from lust to neutrality to disgust. Let me tell you a different story. I am asking for forgiveness for buying stock in high-proof liquor, for making eyes at the neighborhood gnome. Evolution, the identification of a need, the fulfillment of a need. Daylight ends and we agree not to call this a tragedy. I dismount this life like a gymnast from a vault, valorously, without pride. The opposite of loneliness is the shared illusion of intimacy. The opposite of an algorithm is the futility of awakened desire. So what if all being is hypothetical? You took the last of my imagined grief and left me with fire. And no 21st century poet feels like they've done their duty literary history without writing at least one poem titled pastoral or anti-pastoral or necro-pastoral or post-pastoral, etc. So here's mine. It's just called pastoral. It's almost autumn. Gen Z adjusts its headphones for the sound of Chance the Rapper to come booming through. Remind me, who is a fickle mistress? Is it nature or time? I'm no prophet. I knew my friend's marriage was doomed when she told me her husband said, "What's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine." Idiocy comes in 3 colors. Insanity is measured by degrees. Whoever said the devil is in the details knew a thing or two about assembling furniture or disease. The only known paradise beckons, stupor of $5 margaritas and slot machines. It was a mistake to anthropomorphize the mascot. It was a mistake to mistake for lumber the trees. I've not done a lot of Zoom readings, so I'm used to kind of chatting between poems, but I'm seeing all your beautiful faces and I'm feeling weird just kind of chatting between poems. So I will, well, I'm not good at endings. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. This one's called Ex Machina. Obviously, you know, kind of the inducement of an end to a plot or play without the deus part, which would be God. Ironically, I start with the word God, so let's go from there. Ex Machina. God, seduction is such a bore. I fall asleep at the control panel of the tilt-a-whirl. I can see you're having fun, which is great, but the only thought I'm having is ramp it up, ramp it down, then go. The problems of suffering and desire aren't about forbearance or delayed gratification. It's about identifying the one hurdle you've identified as insurmountable, then mounting it. Ta-da, voila. So there. With you, anything seemed possible. What do you mean I don't have to put my toiletries into travel-sized containers? Do you surmount the jurisdiction of airport security too? So long. Thanks for the retirement luncheon, the gold watch you set ticking like a bat out of hell, when what I really wanted was a diamond tennis bracelet, pay-per-view, and a chubby child to call my own. The wicked prosper. Everyone is a tourist sometimes. I make up for deceit and innovation in being willing to sacrifice a lung. Every subject needs its object. Mine, a bell so heavy it can't be rung. I'm gonna try to, Sarah, how many poems did you read? 6, 7, or 8? I think I'll just read 1 or 2 more.
Read as many as you want. You can keep going.
No, everyone here has much better things to do than listen to me read poetry, but I'm gonna keep echoing off Sarah's wonderful poems in salvo with thinking back, especially in these successive crises we've kind of been experiencing politically and psychically. I think, you know, from COVID to everything else going on. I'm in Halifax right now, Nova Scotia, where I moved in December, but I moved there from Montreal, but I moved there from Chicago where I did my PhD. So, but I am American citizen with Canadian permanent residency. So I'm watching kind of agog with deep concern, and also, you know, the hope beyond hope, you know, that I can return to the States someday, and also that, you know, it could become a place of, you know, greater actual representation and, you know, social liberties and freedoms and safety for all people. Sorry, that sounds like some kind of cliched banner statement. I didn't mean it that way, but I live in Halifax. I guess I wanted to say that. This one's called Cinema Vérité. Should nature be my profile photo or my cover photo? Should I adopt a mantra or a tantra? Must I again face a heckling crowd or a bad steward of the earth, whipping the one animal entrusted to him? If so, kill me now. Actually, I think I'm already dead. My brain is floating in formaldehyde, My preferred pastime is staring at the wall. But I am godlike at the typewriter, and I am also a skilled movie critic. When the subtitles or voiceovers are off, I know instantly. If brevity is the soul of wit, I am clearly soulless, as I take forever to say anything or get anywhere, despite the ministrations of several seraphim. It takes an army to keep me alive. I no longer fear mirrors because I know who I am looking at. I am, surprise, surprise, looking at me. Jesus Christ, superstar, are you just going to stand there and watch me burn? I pegged you as one who preferred a story to an anecdote, but clearly I was mistaken. My sails are set for Death Valley, despite the flat foreground and financial exigencies of today. See above, see below. Move the decimal, I mean decibel, 2 places to the left. Then you'll know my worth, my value, my market share. Love is a pocket of kryptonite, extemporaneous words spoken in the heat of passion, off the cuff. You knew me, I knew you. Let that be enough. I think I'll just read one more poem. Speaking of the local particulars, I just published a new chapbook with, where's Jonathan? Where's Jonathan? Is it okay if I read a poem from my book that's not that one?
Of course.
Okay, I just published this little chapbook. It's rectangular, which I thought was a wonderful, I don't know the actual dimensions because I don't really do numbers, but it's more like a rectangle. It's called that. It was published with Gasparilla Press in Kentville, Nova Scotia, about a month ago.
And what's the name of the chapbook?
That Tree Is Mine. Yeah, it got lime green font, which I was thrilled about. So I will just read. These ones are very short. So, and they were written when I met Heather, who I think is on this. Heather and Sarah at the Elizabeth Bishop Seminar at Vassar College in 2016. Yeah, when I had a very bad job in New York. So I'll read just 2 from this, and like I said, they're short. I'll read the title poem and then one other short one. That tree is mine. We are content in our domicile, out of sync with meter and form. Something so far from a perfect first draft exploding, pop rocks on the tongue. I open my wardrobe and proper nouns fall out. I lace my shoes and get caught on sprung verbs. I desire to get close to the Creator's intention for my life, and if there isn't one, to make splendid antitheses in response to an original clause in time. The proprietor's note flutters in the wind like a fussy bride. I often wonder how it would feel to look out a window and say, that tree is mine. And then the last one comes from, the title is a reference to Eastern religion, Buddhism. It's called The Four Noble Truths. Hunger makes us, drives us to Orion's belt to beg for a tureen of soup amid the night sky's wonders. I cut my teeth on leather. I rip the hide of another. Hunger for what we do not see, cannot know, compels us beyond the liminal into the starched white light of dawn. I close my eyes and voila, beefsteak, tomatoes, eggs, zucchini ripening on the vine. It breaks my heart to tell you this, but there is no end to this hunger. There is no end to desire in time.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Virginia. And I want to remind everybody, if they have any questions, they can submit them into the chat and I will ask them. I have a question myself, and I know it's not the book, or it's, we're here for your 2 poetry collections, but in each introduction, I did allude to the forthcoming Marbles on the Floor, which I think is such an evocative title because it's it conjures a kind of playing with marbles on the floor, but it's also, for adults, that's a dangerous situation to have marbles on the floor. So I wonder, also, I should be upfront, I'm something of an imposter. I'm not an events coordinator. I do manage this bookstore, which in normal times is a normal bookstore. So I've been doing these virtual events for 2 or 3 months now, and they're sort of what I look forward to, because I get to hear poems like yours and be introduced to writers like you. I think it's a good substitute for what everybody's missing from bookstores, which is that act of discovery, of finding a book on the shelf or on a table. And in my experience so far, the best of these events have happened between friends, when you can tell that there's a kind of creative chemistry between the authors. And it's clear between the two of you that there's a degree of respect and love, and enough that you would collaborate on a book with an evocative title like Marbles on the Floor. So maybe if you could each briefly, while we wait for questions, say what your work has meant to each other and what led to your collaborating on a book like Marbles on the Floor, forthcoming from the University of Akron Press. Sarah, would you like to answer first?
Yeah, I would love to. First, Virginia, that was a gorgeous reading, just so beautiful. Yeah, as Virginia said, we both met at an NEH seminar on Elizabeth Bishop in the Literary Archive, and that was just such a wonderful group. The friendships that were formed there, the collegiality has continued to be just a source of joy and excitement in my life. And Virginia is a poet, a thinker, and a friend that I gravitated to very early on. Virginia has taught me so much about, I guess I would say, how to expand the lyric voice. I'm always impressed by the way that Virginia is able to thwart lyric transcendence, often by embracing bathos, aporia, ellipsis, and I'm just so impressed by the momentum of her poems. There's really this kind of astonishing energy and embrace of various discourses, idioms, registers that I continue to learn from. So Marbles on the Floor is actually Virginia's baby, so I'll let her talk about it. I'm just so fortunate to kind of tag along and get to be a part of it. And I'll just also say one of our contributors is here in the audience. I'm so glad to see Christopher Salerno. He'll be contributing to the anthology. Yeah, Virginia, do you want to say more about the anthology?
Yeah, sure. I loved what you said about the title, Jonathan. Yeah, like the title is from a Dickinson poem, where she uses the metaphor of marbles on the floor to describe the brain's unraveling, or kind of a descent into madness. And I love that metaphor of, when we all are working with these huge sheaves of poems, and obviously many of you probably, if not all of you, have been maybe to an artist residency or some kind of secluded place of assembling a manuscript, where people do the things where they post things on the wall or lay them on the floor. And I struggled. Christopher, actually, sorry, not trying to shine a spotlight on you, Chris, but has helped me edit a couple of my books. And I was really struggling with this idea of how does an emerging, or even, not, more established writer go about the process of or ordering a sequencing a collection in terms of what poems go with what poems, sectioning, titles, epigraphs. So Sarah and I had this idea kind of based on a germination of an idea based on that Dickinson line and quote of, just having a whole welter of material and not knowing how to kind of create a taxonomy of it for this book project. And we did a little research, and we couldn't really find a lot of craft books on that subject. So we thought maybe this is an intervention that could be timely. And yeah, so that's kind of how it kind of got launched. And it's going to be some scholarly essays, some more craft-based essays, and some people just talking about their own idiosyncrasies. idiosyncratic process of, listening to death metal and sipping sangria while, throwing papers in the air or whatever, whatever works for individuals. So yeah. And then just about Sarah and I, as she mentioned, the Bishop Seminar was incredibly, incredibly serendipitous and wonderful. I think some of my most precious lifelong friends, including Sarah and Heather, I met at that conference. Sarah and Heather and many others, there was an anthology that was created with Lever Press from the archival research, and Sarah's essay chapter specifically talks about a bishop's work in terms of geopoetics. And what I've really but initially and also increasingly come to just love and admire about Sarah's work and learn from is the integrity with which she kind of connects and stitches together her critical scholarly work, essays, reviews, and scholarship along with her poems. For me, I always feel like when I'm writing prose of any kind that I'm like sentence mode, therefore I must go to my head and think about discourse and think about, received knowledge and think about all these things. But for Sarah, both the way she approaches sentences and lines and the way she approaches ideas and the materiality of words, both in prose and in poetry, seem to me to be very like yoked and organic. And that's one kind of formal thing that I've learned so much about her work, is that when you start writing prose, whether it's, an email to a student or a critical essay or anything, you don't have to automatically go into like abstract cerebral mode. You can kind of let the two be interconnected. So that's something, and as you can have heard, if you haven't encountered Sarah's work before, her poetry is so magnanimous. It's so, she acknowledges and kind of braces herself as a poetic speaker against the hurts and the wounds and the actual very, very real, devastations to humanity and even maybe our survival as a species. But she does it in this kind of envelopment of, safety and hope and protection within her speakers, often which are animals, or a speaker with great sympathy for animal consciousness. And I always kind of feel very held and not comforted in any kind of art as therapy way, but very reassured and nurtured by Sarah's poetry, and enlightened and enlivened by her prose and her, as I said, many serpentine ways in which she connects her ideas and her ethics and her philosophy to her writing. So I adore her. I'm just gonna put that out there. I adore her and her work. Yeah.
You're making me blush. No, that's really sweet and generous. I feel the same way about you. I feel like you always write from a place of generosity and from urgency. Whether I'm reading your criticism or your poetry, I feel that there is just this very inclusive consciousness. I feel that you're always thinking about ways in which to include all kinds of readers, right? Those who embrace difficulty, textual difficulty, elision, but also finding other ways for readers who may be new to a particular field or new to poetry, to get them involved. And I think you do that a lot of times with kind of this this intertextual mode in your poetry, right? In which from your centos to your mediations with other voices, other poets, marginalized people sometimes, you're able to kind of think through an intersubjective space in poetry. And that's something I've really admired, and I think I've learned a great deal from in your poetry. But yes, thank you. That's so sweet. I'm so overjoyed to be reading alongside Virginia. It's a great honor.
I do have a question from the chat from Heather, who says, "Wonderful reading, Sarah and Virginia. Your books both seem so prescient, almost prophetic for our current moment and crises. Do you think poetry as a genre has its ears to the ground ahead of other discourses?" Sarah, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think yes and no. Like when I think about the death spiral and its origins, I was writing during the years that Trump was campaigning, and during the years he was in office, and I was just writing revenge poem after revenge poem after revenge poem against Trump, um, to the point where I was just like finding that I had a kind of manuscript, but it was like revenge poem 1, revenge poem 2, revenge poem 3, and clearly, yeah, that got a little stultifying. So what I think what I admire about, or what draws me to poetry is that it offers a space for imaginative play, and I think I'm drawn as a writer to elision, to textual difficulty, and my own personal interest is in the relationship between science and poetry, the processes of inquiry that they might share, the ways in which they might not gravitate so much to interpretive mastery or to closure, but the ways in which they hold in suspension certain kinds of questions, and the ways in which poetry and science may lead to those aha moments of discovery. So yeah, that's to say poetry for me, I think it's something I turn to pretty reflexively in my own case.
And Virginia?
Yeah, there's like I think it's just dirt on my screen, but it's making me look like I have a bug on my face. I just echoing Sarah, this chapbook, the last read from, written in a time of, obviously just all the exigencies. There's a suite of sonnets in there, like Tyrant Sonnet, Insurrection Sonnet. I mean, on a personal note, they were kind of revenge poems against a very toxic boss I had, but it was also, kind of a meta projection for the father and also Trump and everything that was happening and was to come. But I agree with Sarah, like that kind of rebellion or kind of anger, or even, it's not I've always have said anger, like a metaphor, is like a vehicle to get somewhere. It's not like an end state. So for me, that state of like, if I take all that kind of anger or, I feel like resistance or even revolt, as Kristeva said, is like the root of the word in Sanskrit is like turning or overcoming. It's not like, just an endless thrashing in space. So for me, poetry has, it's ear to the ground, and it's in a way that prose doesn't, especially like, political writing, which I do attempt a lot, but I often find myself collapsing before the finish line, because metrically, stanzaically, and somatically, poetry is linked through deixis to the body and the lived experience and context. So there isn't really a way to exceed or leap ahead of the body or its lived experience when you're writing a poem or reading a poem or hearing other people read poems. Yeah, so it grounds you in the here and now, which is never a place really, in nature at least, of despair. If you or an animal are still, or even the sprout of grass or a flower are still alive, nature is alive, our bodies are alive. It's a different kind of paradigm shift than how lost we can get in our heads, and how much despair and existential nihilism and futility are a function of our advanced state of consciousness or technological advancements. I think if I were a person who really believed in space travel, or that the earth is ruined, so we should all just take flight to Mars or become robotic, labor machines, then yeah, I would probably not think earth is a place worth living on anymore. But because of poetry and how lines delineate time and space and breath, I definitely, it gets me up in the morning for sure.
And I think we have time for one more question from Jen in the chat, who says, grateful to both of you for such stirring poems. Thinking again about your forthcoming collaboration, how did you each decide how to organize your books? What directed your structural choices? Sarah, would you like to take that one first?
Sure. Thanks, Chen, for your question. So I let's see. This is always a process that's a little bit mysterious to me, which is why I jumped on the opportunity to help Virginia with this anthology, because we haven't really theorized, right, what moves a manuscript in a particular direction. I did use the services of Christopher Salerno. Thank you so much for your help with organizing my manuscript. Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me in terms of organization or structuring the book is thinking about having that other reader, placing myself in the position of the other who's reading the manuscript for the first time, and having that second reader be able to tell me what sorts of things they're seeing, whether it's poems that incline towards a personal mythos or poems that move to a place of complexity. I think I'm always drawn to poems that to manuscripts that that continue to complicate not just themes, but also metaphors, rhetorical devices, figures, right? That's always interesting to me. Yeah, I don't have like an answer that is extremely coherent, but I think that's part of the point, right? Like there's something about putting together a manuscript that is a little bit mystifying, and hopefully with the anthology we'll be able to come to a clearer answer about that.
And Virginia?
The question, Jen, was specifically about the anthology, right? Yeah. Oh.
I wanted to know how you guys decided to organize your individual poetry collections.
Okay, like our recent collections. Okay, mine is mine became an abecedarian. Oh God, too many syllables.
Abecedarian?
Thank you, Sarah. See, she's my wing woman.
I'm going to go with it.
It's alphabetically ordered. It's kind of a long story how that happened, but yeah, I think for me sequencing is the hardest thing about poems. Sectioning I can do. Titling for some reason comes relatively easy to me. Like I always know what's going to be the title poem, except for the end of Spectacle, which Jen literally saved the day. Read the entire book. We went back and forth for days. She gave me amazing title ideas, and her suggestion became the title of that book. So I just lied in saying that I'm good at titling, because clearly my friends have been my saviors. Yeah, in terms of putting it together, though, I kind of knew when it was done. I mean, obviously, when you submit to contests and things like that, you kind of have an idea of the spatial parameters, 48 whatever it is, like 80 pages. I'm not a maximalist in my actual poem aesthetics, but I'm a minimalist. Or excuse me, I'm not a minimalist in my poem aesthetics, but I'm a minimalist in terms of, everyone trying to get a first book published or even a second is like, you just stay very close to that kind of like baseline of 48 pages. Like, I don't really want to. You can only really scream when you've been given a chance to whisper, was always how I told it to myself. So it's 48 pages, as was my first book. But yeah, I can't really say anything in terms of my own organizational abilities in ordering it or assembling it, because I had help. Yeah, but I hope to learn from the anthology that I'm co-editing with Sarah. So it's really not like a up on high kind of like, it's more like I really need to learn through the process of hearing what other people have to say to figure out, the more technical, mechanical, and aesthetic, approaches myself.
Right. It really dramatizes, I think, how important having another reader is, right?
Oh, totally.
Right.
Like you said about Harvey's essay, the idea of like, saying that another reader, is the sounding board for which your own work can be. Like without that, I mean, we've all written artist statements in the abstract about our own work for a residency or any kind of other, requirement or committee. And it's kind of hard to just,
you need that other
shadow box with yourself about what your own craft is trying to do. Yeah.
Right. It's a weird process in that it's like you need another consciousness to enter
Yeah.
into
Exactly.
space. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Sarah and Virginia, thank you so much for your readings tonight. Thank you for the gifts of your books. You can find the link to buy Sarah's book straight from Black Lawrence Press. You also find the link to buy Virginia's book straight from us. And if you wait long enough for the world to write itself, you can come to any McNally Jackson and find them on our poetry shelves. But thank the two of you for joining us tonight and everybody who tuned in. This was really a lot of fun. So be well, be safe, and thank you so much. And just have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Jonathan.
much.
Thank you, Sarah. And I can't wait
Thank
for
you.
your other launch in addition to this one. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Have a nice night.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Bye, everyone.
Bye.